everyone, welcome back. Today we are doing a tech for Jyoti, Moag, Ancient. Jyoti is a 4-mana 2/4 legendary elemental. When Jyoti, Moag, Ancient enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 green forest dryad land creature token for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. At the beginning of each combat, land creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is Jyoti's power. So this is just some good old-fashioned Simic lands. So I played Jyoti. Jyoti kind of has half-off commander tax, just because when he enters the battlefield, since you've already cast him once from the command zone the first time you play him, you're just going to get a land creature token, which we'll be able to tap for mana. So even if he does die a bunch of times, like, he'll always come back, at least kind of with a land. So in a weird roundabout way, kind of half-off, kind of not, whatever. He's also a very versatile build, just because there are so many options for Simic lands. It's a very well documented archetype. There's so many Simic land commanders. So it's a very versatile build. You have a lot of options that you can pick and choose from. Lands also, there's a billion lands in Magic, so you kind of pick whichever ones you think would work best. It's also really interesting and cool to have our lands kill people. It's a cool way to play Battlecruiser. And it's also fun to mitigate things because our lands are also our mana, and there are creatures too. So we kind of got to pick and choose with what makes sense if we want to spend the turn killing someone or if we want to spend the turn building the board state. And then also, since he just is a 2/4, he gives our team +2/+2 each combat, not just our combat. Each of our opponent's combats, our guys get +2/+2 because that's simply his power. Here's a game plan. We don't need him to win, but he does help us by accelerating us. The way we really do win this game is by animating a bunch of our lands and then attacking. Jyoti just kind of makes that happen a little bit faster because he's effectively a lord, and that sometimes makes guys. So he's cool with that aspect, but we don't need him to win. Early game, ideally, we're just going to want to get down utility, artifacts, enchantments, some mana dorks, whatever small guys we can really do, right? Mid-game, around turn 4-5, we're going to want to play Jyoti and then the token that comes along with him. And then mid-game's interesting because we're just going to kind of wait around a little bit. We're just going to want to build our board state, and it's very awkward for our opponents to deal with that just because we just keep ramping and doing more things and getting more resources and just outvaluing them. And then late game, when we choose to kill someone, we're going to animate all of our lands at once and then beat down our opponents. Checking down, that costs about $400 at the making of the video. Take that with a grain of salt because prices of the cards may go up or down because as of the time of the video, the new cards from the set they haven't been shown yet. So take it with a grain of salt. Also, get the cards you need from the link down below, and then remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Subscribing is what helps the channel grow, and I appreciate it when you guys do it. Going into Planeswalkers, we have Nissa, Vital Force. Nissa is a 5-mana walker that has a +1 that untaps a land, and it just becomes a 5/5 with haste until end of turn, which is really cool. So a lot of these kinds of effects are how we're really going to win, is just for an easy example, is we have Jyoti on the field. We have Jyoti on the field turn 2. We plus Nissa, turn a land into a 5/5. We attack, Jyoti's trigger happens, and then it's now a 7/7. It's pretty cool. Then in a pinch, we can return target permanent card from our graveyard to our hand, which is nice. And then the most realistic emblem I think we can get in the deck is this one. Because Nissa starts at 5, we plus her to 6. So if we plus her to 6 and then she lives a turn, we get the emblem, which is whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we may draw a card, and we probably will. Nissa, Who Shakes the World, is great. Our deck is predominantly green, so having our forest tap for double mana is really cool. We can also just turn a land into a 3/3 with Vigilance and Haste, which is really good because, again, we want land creatures. Here's a key thing that's important for land creatures. Them having Vigilance is very important because, like I said earlier, we kind of get 2-for-1 in a weird way, is we either use our lands to attack, and then since they tap to attack, we now don't get a main phase, or we basically just do whatever we want and then we don't really attack. So it's either like we get to play a bunch of spells, but we don't attack, or we attack and we don't get to play any spells. The point of it is that having Vigilance is huge, just because now we can do whatever we want pre-combat, where we go to combat, right? We attack with all of our guys, And then since they have Vigilance, they don't tap, so now we can still cast spells main phase 2, which is nice. If we can emblem Nissa, very cool. If we get an emblem that says our lands are indestructible, I feel like it'd be hard for us to lose from there. Renin Realmbreaker is really nice, just for a nice 3-mana walker. It filters our lands. We don't really care about that too much, just because, you know, we're a 2-color deck. Then it just makes one of our lands a 3/3 elemental with Vigilance, Hexproof, and Haste until end of turn, which is cool. We can also mill 3 cards and then put a permanent card from the cards we milled into our hand. It's kind of nice because it's like a weird draw. It's a weird draw in a way, but if we somehow ult it, we can play lands from our graveyard and cast permanent spells from our graveyard, which would be really cool. The final walker is Renin 7 for a 5-mana, 4 loyalty ability, 5 loyalty planeswalker. The way I plan on using Renin 7 is we're going to play Renin 7, and then we're just going instantly -3 it, just because we want to be able to protect Renin 7. Then we're just going to start plussing and zeroing. I don't have any intentions on ulting this guy. Renin 7 really exists to make a tree folk to protect it. That is also a huge creature because we're going to have a lot of lands. And really just to draw us cards. That's pretty much it. Going into creatures, we have a lot of elementals in this deck, believe it or not. We have Ancient Green Warden because he lets us play lands from our graveyard and then has a Panharmonicon ability for our lands, which is really good. Playing lands from our graveyard is a very, very important factor of this deck because when our lands die, when our land creatures die, we're losing that mana. So we really want to be able to play our lands like consistently. So we want to be able to be fearless with attacking with our lands and also not getting blown out by, you know, us not having any mana in the future. Ashaya is really great just because she has that, you know, power and toughness equal number of lands you control, so she's already huge. But the important thing is non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to their other types. Ashaya is not only a big creature, but the important part about her is that she turns all of our non-token creatures into lands, which then benefit from all our land creatures you control effects. Like now, even just looking at Jyoti and Ashaya is all of our creatures get +2/+2 every combat. Then we have AOZ, classic landfall guy, 7-mana 5/5. When he enters the battlefield, let's look at him in a vacuum. A 7-mana 5/5 enters the battlefield. You make 7/0/1 plants, and then when we go to turn 8, we play a land, and we now have 7 1/2s that only get bigger and bigger. So he's just good. We get a lot of guys, and we have a lot of lands enter, so those guys are going to be really big. Azusa Lost But Seeking, just so we can play multiple lands every turn, because that's also another big part of the deck, is being able to just whip out as many lands as we can, because remember, lands also equal creatures. Blossoming Tortoise is a really funny card. He enters the battlefield or attacks, we mill 3, then return a land card from our grave to the battlefield tapped. Activated abilities of lands you control cost 1 less. We have a lot of man lands in this deck, which man lands, for my newer Magic guys, are pretty much just lands that have an ability that say, like, it'll tap for mana and the ability's like, pay like 3 mana and this creature becomes like a 2/2 until end of turn or whatever, right? So he makes our man lands go easier and then gives our other land creatures +1/+1. So he is like a little bit of a lord himself. Bristly Bill is really good because the idea is that when we play a land, we're just going to put that counter on Jyoti. So then when we go to combat, all of our guys are going to get +3/+3 or +4/+4, bigger and bigger, and then we can just double it if we want. Bristly Bill is really good. Dryad the Elysian Grove. Again, we don't care about filtering our mana, but we do get to play an additional land each turn. We have so many play an additional land each turn, and so many play land from the graveyard effects every turn. The deck kind of can go really nuts. Embodiment of Insight is a card I've never knew existed, but it's a 5-mana 4/4 Vigilance. Land creatures you control have Vigilance, and then whenever a land enters the battlefield, you may have target land you control become a 3/3 elemental with haste. Therefore, and also it has Vigilance. I was saying earlier how important it is for our lands to have Vigilance. Embodiment Insight just kind of solves that problem. We have Greensleeves, Mara Sorcerer. Greensleeves is an interesting card because when we are off on the land creature idea, if something's happening that prevents us from attack or, you know, prevents us from doing stuff, right? We're a battle cruiser deck. We win by attacking with creatures. There's not much we can do if someone does stuff to make us not attack. But if someone shuts off our lands for some reason with like a winter orb effect or whatever, Greensleeves is really nice just because when a land enters the battlefield, we'll make a 3/3, right? That's kind of the reason we're running him. Those are the effects we're looking for, is just when a land enters, make a 3/3. It's just, we just want to make our board go pretty wide. Joriel, Voice of Zalfir, is really good. At the beginning of combat on your turn, up to one target land you control becomes an XX green flying with haste, whatever, where X is the number of cards in our hand. Then, whenever a land creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So, whenever our creatures deal combat damage to a player, ideally, draw a card. Kamal, Heart of Krosa, is a really cool card. He is an 8-mana 5/5, and he says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. And that's really good because that's like a pseudo Jyoti effect. The interesting part about him for this deck is until end of turn, target land you control becomes a 1/1 elemental creature with vigilance, indestructible, and haste. So the cool thing about Kamal and Jyoti is you can stack which trigger happens first. So let's say we have a 1/1, right? Let's say we have Kamal, Jyoti, and we just paid 2 mana to make a land a 1/1. So we have Kamal's trigger happen first. So now all creatures are +3/+3. So we have a 4/4 land creature. Then since Kamal's ability happened first, Jyoti, instead of being a 2/2, is now a 5/5. So now land creatures we control get +5/+5 until end of turn. So now our 4/4 is a 9/9 with vigilance, indestructible, and haste. So a lot of really cool things you can do with these guys. Llanowar Loam Speaker is really nice just because he's a mana dork, and then he can also just make a land a 3/3. So he's cool because early game we want the mana, but then late game, target land you control becomes a 3/3. So he's kind of like a decent way to animate lands. Multani, Yavimai's Avatar, is a 6-mana huge creature with reach and trample. Gets +1/+1 for each land you own in your grave and on our field. So it's already a huge trampler. And then we can pay 2 mana, return 2 lands you control to their owner's hands to return Multani from their graveyard to our hands. So cool things we can do with this. In a pinch, say Multani dies, right? Or gets milled or whatever. In a pinch, we can stop 2 land creatures from dying. We can get landfall triggers again, and Multani's honestly just a constant issue that is a very big issue. It's just a big creature. It's like going to be like a 20/20 with like trample. Who wants to deal with it? Then Rampaging Ballast, just whenever a land enters, we get a 4/4. We have a lot of lands enter. Ramanup Excavator is a huge effect for this deck just because we really do care about playing lands from our graveyard. Again, when our lands are our creatures, and when our creatures die, we lose mana. We don't want to essentially be destroying our own lands by having like weird combat. So it's nice to be able to have reassurance to be like, oh, if we do attack and things don't go our way, at least we can get them back. Slogurk, the Oversight Slime, is a really cool guy. 3 mana 3/3 with trample is already a pretty good rate. When a land card is put into a graveyard from anywhere, put a 1/1 counter on them. So that it gets milled or like one of our land creatures die, anything. Remove 3 1/1 counters, return him to our hand. Then when he leaves the battlefield, return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to our hand. He is cool because he's a big body when we want a big body. He also is hard to kill because we'll just bounce him, and then we get benefit by bouncing him. Let's say we are running low on lands, or too many creatures are dying, or whatever, right? Let's say we just don't even have like a play lands from graveyard effect yet. Slogurk is kind of a pseudo way to make that happen on top of being a big guy. While I'm on the topic of Slogurk, not even Slogurk, hot take, I like the black and white art. I don't like the set it was from. I don't think Double Feature was a great set, but I do like the black and white art. Going into Sylvan Advocate, which was my Oath of the Gatewatch pre-release promo. Sylvan Advocate is a 2/3 with Vigilance for 2 mana, which is really good. And then as long as you control 6 or more lands, Sylvan Advocate and land creatures you control get +2/+2, which is really good. So late game, this is a 2 mana 4/5 that is also a lord for all your lands. Really good. Tatyova is also probably, I would say, the best Simic land commander. She kind of made it happen. 5 mana 3/3. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, gain a life and draw a card. That happens pretty frequently, so we'll be getting a lot of life and drawing a lot of cards. Tatyova, Steward of the Tides. Just straight up land creatures you control have flying. Giving our team evasion is super cool. When a land enters the battlefield under our control, if we control 7 or more lands, up to one target land you control becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with haste. So basically, when we play a landfall, if we have 7 or more lands, make a 3/3 flyer. Sounds good to me. Again, so many effects care about animating lands, because that's how we win, and now they have evasion, so we can beat down her easier. Titania, Protector of Argoth, is a 5-mana 5/3. When she enters the battlefield, return target land you control from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's just fine if we have anything die or whatever. We'll just get it right back. Then, whenever a land you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a 5/3 green elemental creature token. So the nice thing about this is because most animation things, like Tatuvia, for example, turns our guys into 3/3s. So even if like a 3/3 forest dies or whatever, at least it's getting replaced with a 5/3 token, which is still nice, and then we'll just replay it from the graveyard. Waker of the Wilds is a cool card just because it's one of the few permanent reanimate or animate token cards. Not animate tokens, but so many magic slang. 5-mana 3/3, X/2/2, put X 1/1 counters on target land you control. That land becomes a 0/0 elemental with haste. So we just pay X, put a bunch of counters on it. The cool thing about it is we can do it at instant speed. So if we just have mana we want to spend or whatever, or if our guys since a lot of our guys have vigilance anyway, we can go do a big attack, and then in response to blocks, we can use Wake of the Wilds effectively as a pump ability if we want to. Really cool card. World Shaper, when it attacks, mill 3. When it dies, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. We do have a couple big swing, like get all lands back. World Shaper is a good one, just because he helps enable it too. Eudora Grave Gardener is one of the cooler cards of the deck, if not the coolest card in the deck. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you may return it to the battlefield face down under its owner's control. It is a forest land, right? Let's talk about that. Let's say we animate a forest, right? We make a 3/3 forest. That is not a token. It is a land creature. It is not a token at all. That creature now dies. We flip it over face down. Is a forest. We can then animate that forest again, attack. If it dies, we flip it back over as a forest? No. I don't know, honestly. I guess, yeah, just you would turn it face down. I don't know. Someone let me know how that works. But in my head, I think we get like a little 2-for-1 at the very worst. And then the final creature is Titania, Voice of Gaia. I put these in a special side just because Argoth is going to fuse into Titania, Gaia Incarnate, which we'll talk about in a second. Titania is great just because whenever one or more lands are put into our graveyard from anywhere, we gain 2 life. So if they die or whatever, it's still nice. Then at the beginning of our upkeep, if there are 4 more land cards in our graveyard and we own both this and Argoth, we flip it. Argoth is just a land that enters tapped unless we have a legendary green creature. Taps for a green, we can pay 4 mana and tap it to mill 3 and then make a 2/2 bear. Unfortunately, only as a sorcery, but it does help enable Titania, so it is nice. Then, if we have both of them and it flips, we get Titania, Gaia Incarnate, which is literally a busted card. Vigilance, Reach, Trample, Haste. Power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. When it enters the battlefield, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Then, pay 4 mana, put 4 1/1 counters on target land you control. It becomes a 0/0 with haste, which is effectively a 4/4 with haste. Whew. That's a lot of text for a card. But no, this card is absolutely bonkers. It does pretty much everything we want it to do. Gumming into sorceries, Awaken the Woods, just pay X and make X Jyoti tokens pretty much. They're just Forest Dryads. They still tap for mana, which is nice. But they're just, Jyoti makes the tokens. And they're land creatures, so they can get big pretty easy. Coastal Breach, and I do have a couple other effects like this because I thought it was interesting. Return all non-land permanents to their owner's hand. So the way I look at cards like this is, okay, we animate all of our lands. We animate all our lands, they're now creatures, and then we tap some of them, and then we play Coastal Breach, and then return all non-land permanents to their owner's hand. The cool thing is, all of our creatures stay, because they're lands. Also, even better, is all of our opponent's stuff is gone, so we get free attacks. Cultivate, I also run Kodama, so I'm not going to talk about it then, but Search your deck for 2 basic lands, put 1 into the field tapped, 1 into your hand. It's important to run these because we want to have access to as many lands as we can right away. So it's good ramp, and then it's also good just to get a landfall for next turn, which is really cool. So really getting as many lands out of our deck and into our hand and into our grave is really nice. Devastation Tide. Return all non-land permanents to our owner's hand. If our lands are creatures, they're not going to get bounced, and we have a free attack. Flood of Tears, pretty much the same deal, except this one has a little bit of added benefit. If you return 4 or more non-token permanents you control, you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. So I guess like we at least get something back, whatever the highest mana value was, we get back. So it's still a treat. And then Kodama's is just Cultivate. Nature's Lore and 3 Visits are the same card. We're going to search our deck for a forest card to put it on the battlefield. When I say forest card, there's a couple options we can get. It's really Tendershoot Dryad, not Tendershoot Dryad, Dryad Arbor, I'm sorry. Dryad Arbor, Breeding Pool, or whatever the Surveil land one is called. I completely forget. Ideally the Surveil land, just so we can kind of get scry advantage, or if we just want to get a regular forest, it'll just basically be one mana spell just to get that forest to the field. It's all really good. Rude Awakening is a neat card. 5 mana. Choose one. Untap all of our lands, or until end of turn, lands you control become 2/2s that are still lands. Ideally, we pay, 8? We pay 8 on this. At the very worst, it's a free spell, right? Just because we're untapping all of our lands anyways. So I look at it as a 5 mana. I mean, it's like a weird ritual for 5 mana, or we can pay 5 mana to have as many of our guys become 2/2s, which will then be 4/4s with Jyoti. So a bunch of fine options. Splendid Reclamation, just to get all land cards from our graveyard back to the battlefield. Again, a good effect. Sylvan Awakening is probably one of my favorite cards in the deck. Just 3 mana. Until your next turn, all lands you control become 2/2s with Reach, Indestructible, and Haste. It's nice when they get Indestructible, just so we don't have to worry about them dying or whatever. So it's really nice. 3 Visits is the same as Nature's Lore. Just get the best forest, whatever makes sense for your situation. And then Titania's Command is also another card where you kind of have to do what makes sense for your situation. So you choose 2 of them, right? Exile target player's graveyard, which is definitely a solid effect, and we gain 1 life for each card exiled this way. Search our deck for up to 2 land cards and put them on the battlefield tapped. Not basics, just any lands we want. And then create 2 2/2 bear creature tokens and put 2 1/1 counters on each creature you control. If I was a betting man, and for the sake of this deck, I would say the modes are search for 2 lands and put 2 1/1 counters on the team. Just because then Jody's going to make everything even bigger, because it'll be like +4/+4. So I think it's a pretty good card. And then you can exile on a pinch if you need to. For instance, I'll be honest, guys, Awakening of the Vitu-Ghazi is not the best card, but I love it. And I couldn't find a card to cut for it. Or I couldn't cut it, is what I'm saying. 5 mana instant, put 9 1/1 counters on target land you control. It becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste named Vitu-Ghazi. I think this card is straight up awesome. It is a 5 mana target creature gets, I mean, basically it's like funny because it's like, oh, if we attack with a land, it's like, oh, that creature is now +9/+9 as a combat trick. Or someone attacks us and we can animate the land really quick as like a huge blocker and swing with it next turn. It's such a cool card. Beast Within is just to get rid of something we don't like. They can have a beast. Counterspell is good just because we're in blue and it's fine interaction. Cyclonic Rift, just because we're such a big land heavy deck that we're always going to have the mana for it. Heroic Intervention, because I will say there are some effects that make our lands permanently stick around. Like I think it was like Waker of the Wilds. And we don't want even just like really our stuff to die, because we have so many value creatures like that aren't lands or whatever. So we kind of want them to live if someone tries to nuke. Kamal's Will, we'll probably only cast if we have Jyoti on the field. It just makes the most sense to only do it if we have Jyoti. So 4 mana, until end of turn, any number of target lands you control, which is pretty much all of them, become elemental creatures with vigilance, indestructible, and haste, and then also choose a creature you control. Each creature you control deals combat damage or deals damage equal to its power to that creature. Whew. So it's pretty much a kill spell for 1 creature, and also it animates all of our lands with vigilance, which is huge, and indestructible, which is also huge. So it's like a nice win-win. Natural Affinity is just a nice short, sweet, to the point. Each of our lands becomes a 2/2. We're probably not going to do it as like an instant. I guess if we need to have good blocks, but it's probably a sorcery speed card. Rapid Vigor is a card I do like. Regenerate each creature you control. For those of you who aren't aware of Regenerate, because it is a retired keyword now, Regenerate means the next time this creature would die this turn, instead tap it and it gains indestructible until end of turn. That's effectively what Rapid Vigor says. And the cool thing about it is something I learned while making this deck about Regenerate is how it's kind of like a veil. So in a cool instance, what you can do is on your main phase, you can play Rapid Vigor, right? Which is really cool. So you just play Rapid Vigor on your main phase, and then you go to combat, right? Then any of those creatures that would die, like they're just tapped and indestructible. So it is really neat how it kind of lasts the entire turn. It's cool. It's cool. It's just like another heroic intervention effect. Going into artifacts, we have Amulet of Vigor because whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped under your control, untap it. We have a lot of cards that just say, yeah, this land enters tapped or whatever, right? We just want all of our lands to be untapped so we have access immediately. Biden of Thassa, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, which is definitely really nice. And it's also interesting for pay 2 mana and tap it, creatures your opponents control attack this turn if Fable. So this is nice for us because it can be really awkward for our opponent to attack with other creatures. It effectively makes them tapped down, and then we can sneak in right after and kill them. Conduit of Worlds, you may play lands from our graveyard. Perfect. It does have another ability. I will be honest, I don't plan on using it. For the intentions of this, I can't speak. Bleh. The intentions of this deck, we only wanted to play lands. But if you're in a situation where it makes more sense to skip casting spells your turn and just do the one from your graveyard, that's also fine. Crucible of Worlds, just so we can play lands from our graveyard. Lightning Greaves, just to slap it right on the Jyoti, so he has haste and shroud. It doesn't really need haste, really just the shroud. Soul Ring is Soul Ring. There was something I really thought about while making this deck, and it was I should add a bunch of mana rocks, because if we're tapping our mana rocks, we're not tapping our lands, therefore we have more land creatures to attack with. And then instead I started to think, well, it doesn't matter because we just have the option to make them lands, and it doesn't matter if they're a creature when we tap them, like we're using the mana regardless, so that's why we have many more lands. So it wouldn't make sense. Going into enchantments, Case of the Locked Hothouse. 4 mana, you may play an additional land on each of your turns. We have a lot of cards that do this just because of how crucial it is to our deck. We'll pretty much solve it almost right away. If we play it late game or even early game, it's still fine because we're going to have so many lands. Then you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may play lands, creatures, and enchantment spells from the top of it. Druid class is nice because whenever a land enters, we'll gain a life, and then we want to level it up to level 2 so we can play additional lands on each of our turn. Level 3 is fine. All level 3 does is it just makes one of our lands absolutely gargantuan, which is good in a pinch if we want to. And remember, these are you can only level them up as sorceries. So it is nice, like if we have nothing else to do, like we could, I just make a big guy. Exploration, another just play an additional land, 1 mana, it's really good. Rhystic Study, just so whenever an opponent casts a spell, we either draw a card or they pay 1. Either way, it's a win-win. And then Spelunking, when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you put a cave onto the battlefield this way, gain 4 life. Sorry guys, we don't have any caves. But either way, we draw a card and then put a land on the battlefield, and then our lands enter untapped. Going into these lands, there's really the couple categories I broke them down into is either lands for colors, lands for like utility, and lands really for fun. Breeding Pool is a color land just because we want to have our colors. Cactus Preserve is more like a utility land just because it's essentially a reflecting pool. And then we can also just make it huge until end of turn. It will be a 4/4 at base value just because Jyoti is a 4 mana. And then as it gets bigger, whatever, right? Cascading Cataracts. Indestructible. The cool thing about indestructible lands is that when they're creatures, they're still indestructible. So they're not going away. We have a lot of indestructible lands. Cavern of Souls, we're just going to say elemental, just so our elementals are uncounterable, because we have so many. Even going back to like the first slide, we have like Ashaya, we have Ancient Green Warden, we have Avenger Zendikar, a ton of them, right? Jyoti. We just don't want our elementals to be countered. Command Tower is just another color land. Crawling Barrens is a really cool land. Pay 4 mana, put 2 1/1 counters on it. Then you may have it become a 0/0. So the cool thing about this is we can pay 4 mana and then just put 2 counters on the land and then not really worry about turning it into a creature right away. Because then the counters are going to stay. So if we choose to animate it, it's still going to have those counters on it. If we choose to animate it using its own ability, or if we choose to animate it using another random effect. Either way, it's a really good land to animate. Darksteel Citadel is simply indestructible. Drownyard Temple is nice, just so we can return it from our grave to the battlefield at instant speed. So it's like we don't really have to worry about it dying too much. Dryad Arbor, it's a land, it's a creature, it's the first land creature. It's basically it's really the non-token version of what Jyoti makes. It's a good card. Fairy Conclave is awkward. It enters the battlefield tapped, but we can animate it to make it a 2/1 blue flyer, which is really nice. And again, with Jyoti, that's now a 4/3 flyer. And I know 4/3s doesn't sound like a lot, but man, they really do add up. Field of the Dead is nice because we have so many lands and so much landfall going on. The likelihood we're going to have more than 7 lands with different names is extraordinarily high. So whenever a land enters the battlefield, we'll make a 2/2 zombie, and then we play like so many lands a turn. So double it up. Hall of the Storm Giant is nice. It enters the battlefield tapped if we have 2 or more lands. So ideally we can play it early. But we also have a lot of things that make lands enter untapped. So if not, no big deal. Then it taps for a blue, or you can pay 6 mana until end of turn. Hall of the Storm Giants becomes a 7/7 with Ward 3, which Ward 3 practically says hexproof. I'll die on that hill. But yeah, it's really, really good. Again, 7/7. Jyoti makes it a 9/9. Cool. Hedge Maze, ideally, this is what I was talking about, the Surveil land that we tutor up with like Nature's Lore or 3 visits just so we can surveil them when it enters. It's good. Hinland Harbor, just for colors, always going to enter untapped most likely. Lair of the Hydra is really nice. Again, same thing with all the Storm Giants, enters tapped if we have 2 or more other lands. Then taps for a green. But this one's really nice to animate because it's a green and X, so we can choose how big we want it to be, and it'll just be an XX. Lotus Field enters the battlefield tapped. It has hexproof, and then when it enters, sacrifice 2 other lands, but it does tap for 3 mana of any one color. That's pretty good. If we want to animate it, we can. If we want to have like a hexproof guy, but it's really just so we can tap it and get 3, and then recast those, replay those lands from the grave. Lumbering Falls is nice just because it is just a 3/3 with hexproof when we animate it. Again, that'll be a 5/5 with Jyoti. So again, pretty cool. Mutavault, it's a 1 mana 2/2 land. It's 4/4 with Jyoti for 1 mana. It's any color, it's any type. It's good. Again, that's kind of how we're like looking at a lot of the like cards, is we want to be able to animate lands, but it's also, if we can't do that, we want to make sure that we can animate our own lands. Pretty important. Restless Vinestalk, I think, is the last man land. Enters the battlefield tapped. Pay 5 mana to make it 5/5, and then when it attacks up to 1 other target creature you control has base power and toughness 3/3, which is nice because we can turn like a 1/1 token Jyoti makes into a 3/3 that then gets +2/+2. Or you know what, even better is what we could do is attack, make Jyoti a 3/3, and then all of our guys get +3/+3, making Restless Vinestalk effectively an 8/8. Tanglepool Bridge enters tapped, but it is an indestructible land, so we'll take it. And then Thespian Stage, just so we can copy up to 1, the best land on the battlefield. Most likely going to be ours if we want to have an indestructible guy, or if we want to have a copy of a man land, or if we want to, you know, do whatever, right? Even if it's just like copying a Lotus Field is still really good too. Going into basics, we just have 10 forests and 8 islands. Again, we have a lot of tutors. We want to be able to replay these guys multiple times. So we have total like 40 lands in this deck, and I think that's a fine number. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Get the cards you need from the link down below. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.